being here. So for our round of press conference for this time, we have three gentlemen, very special guests from the IMF and the World Bank. They will be discussing some of the highlights from this morning's session. This morning, they talked about the outlook on the regional and the global economy. As we all know, one of the goals of APEC is to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. But of course, the APEC region is not isolated. We are affected by what is happening in the global economy. So our friends here, our resource speakers, will be talking about the APEC region's chances of hitting its goals, especially on economic growth and sustainability, and taking into account the risks given by external developments. So we will ask each of the gentlemen to give a brief statement, and then we will open the floor to question and answer. So we'll start with Mr. Brekk. He is the Regional Director for Asia Pacific of the International Monetary Fund.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. So I'll just very briefly comment on two areas. I'll talk about APEC and Philippines hosting APEC this year. And then I'll say a few words about how we see the global economic outlook and policy challenges, and perhaps also a few words about Asia. Now, APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, as you probably know, is a forum that has been set up to discuss and share knowledge about economic policies and economic issues. It has 21 member countries, most of them from Asia. But also some from the Americas. So it's a Pacific forum. The Philippines is hosting this year. We're very pleased to be here and be part of it. The IMF's role in this is mainly as a knowledge provider. We are here, we're participating in the meetings, we give overviews on what's going on in the world economy, what are the policy issues, what are the possible solutions. So we're here as a participant and as a supporter. So that's one. In terms of the economic outlook, so let me say a few words about the global economic outlook first, and then a few words about Asia. First, on the outlook on the global side, global growth remains moderate with uneven prospects across the main countries and regions. Growth is projected by the IMF at 3.5% this year globally and 3.8% next year. What we see is a bit of a change in the sense that the outlook for advanced economies is improving, while growth in emerging market and developing countries is projected to be slowing down. And this reflects weaker prospects from some large emerging markets, including oil exporting emerging market countries. That said, emerging markets, and especially in the Asia region, remain the global growth leaders. The risks to the outlook, we think, have become more balanced. The lower oil prices is a positive factor, but there are risks related to financial sector developments, and especially the diverging policy of the major central banks, specifically the US Fed, the ECB, and the Bank of Japan. And these diverging policies could lead to disruptions in financial markets that spill over also to other countries. So what is the policy requirements in this environment? In advanced economies, we think that raising actual and potential growth continues to be the highest priority, combined with continued support to demand and structural reforms. Emerging markets and developing countries also have an important structural reform agenda to raise potential output, and they do in general have policy space to support demand. They have a limited policy space to support demand. In terms of Asia, just a few points. One is that the economic outlook remains favorable. The region is projected to remain the global growth leader, as I said. We are expecting growth in Asia and the Pacific to be 5.5% or roughly 5.5% this year and next year, and with domestic demand being the main driver. Although there is, again, considerable variance across countries in this region. So what we've been discussing here today, and we'll be continuing to discuss tomorrow, is what policies can help secure growth in the short run and the long run. And although the APEC region is quite diverse, I think I can point to a few sort of general points, general issues that countries need to look at. As I said, the main priority is to bolster actual and potential growth first. And the second is to bolster the resilience and to build policy space. So with this in mind, we think monetary policies could be flexible across countries. It needs to respond flexibly because the situation is uncertain. First point. Second policy point is that countries should continue to allow exchange rates to adjust flexibly to changes in underlying fundamentals, although there might be reason to intervene in foreign exchange markets if there is excessive short-term instability. Third, in order to further support stability, countries should focus on strong microprudential supervision and regulation, but also should think about using macroprudential policies to reduce or to increase the resilience to shocks. Fiscal policy, fourth point, has to be a key part of the policy response, and especially to have clear fiscal frameworks with clear medium-term targets supported by strong fiscal anchors. And finally, and fifth point, structural reforms, and these of course vary a lot across countries depending on their situations, remains a high priority. Now, with that background, what we have been discussing in the APEC meetings is the discussions are focused on four policy areas that are quite relevant in this context. One is financial integration. Second is fiscal transparency. Third is financial resilience. And fourth is the need to bolster infrastructure investment. And all these are relevant for dealing with the policy challenges facing the Asia Pacific at this point. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now we want to hear Mr. Rogier Vandenbrink, lead economist of the World Bank for the Philippines.
Thank you very much. I won't go over what my colleague from the IMF has already said. And for those of you who are registered in the World Bank's online media briefing center, you already know that earlier this morning, the bank launched the Global Economic Prospects for June 2015. The report is titled The Global Economy in Transition. And so you would also know that we have maintained our forecast for the Philippines, 6.5% in 2015, 6.5% in 2016, and 6.3% in 2017. And most of you will probably report on these growth forecasts for the Philippines in the context of this environment, this global environment, including higher borrowing costs, but also lower prices for oil, and therefore lower prices for food, which is good for the poor, the easing of growth in China and other countries in the East Asia and Pacific region, and so on and so on. That's fine, but if you do focus solely on these growth forecasts, I think you will miss what I think is the more important and emerging story about the Philippines. For me, as an economist working for an institution committed to eradicating poverty, the real story is this. The Philippines now has achieved macroeconomic stability. It has high growth rates for quite a number of years. And more recently, and that's the important point, it is starting to show the kind of growth which is more inclusive. And that's what we talked about this morning with the APEC delegates. So rewind about 20 or 30 years ago in this country, the stories you heard about the Philippines were all about boom and bust. Real growth was low, inflation rates were high, current account balance was negative, budget deficits were high, national government debt was soaring. In the last several years, these issues are no longer a concern. Real growth has been ranging from 5 to 7%, prices are stable, current account has been registering a surplus, and the country's finances are stronger than ever. Budget deficits are low and government debt measured against GDP is going down. But now, added to this, we're starting to see that the sustained high economic growth in recent years is translating into stronger job creation and poverty reduction. In October last year, the Labor Force Survey reported that net job creation reached over 1 million compared to the same month in the previous year. And the other day, the statistical authorities released the latest jobs numbers to show again that unemployment and underemployment numbers continued to decline. Unemployment fell to 6%, the lowest in 10 years, from 6.4% a year ago. And the reduction in the poverty incidence between the first half of 2012 and 2013 also indicates that growth is becoming more inclusive. The 2013 annual poverty indicator surveys suggest that real income of the bottom 20% grew faster than the rest of the population. This is true for both wage income and entrepreneurial income. For instance, the real wage income of the bottom 20% grew by 9.9% compared to only 2.4% for the upper 80%. Much higher growth of domestic cash transfers of the bottom 20% at 29% suggests that the government's conditional cash transfer program is well targeted and is reaching the poor. So we will continue to monitor the GDP numbers and see if there's a need to tweak our forecasts given the current global scene. But these relative small changes in the growth numbers per se are really secondary to the bigger story that matters. The country has established a clear trajectory towards growth that is more inclusive. And continuing the reforms will ensure that the country will maintain this pattern. We talked about that. How do you maintain it? It's tough. Change is tough. Vested interest will oppose reforms. But to keep the country on this path, that's what needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogier, for that positive view about the Philippines. Mr. Peiris, Mr. Rogier gave some views about the Philippines, that growth is starting to become inclusive and starting to create more jobs. Being the IMF representative to the Philippines, do you have more or less similar view, or are you contradicting his outlook? Okay.
I think if there are more specific questions, we can probably discuss, because in many of these areas we share similar views on this.
Okay, so Mr. Peiris will be willing to ask specific questions about the Philippines. Now we are opening the floor for Q&A. Who wants to ask the first question? Okay, Mika.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vandenbrink. Sir, in the report, we'd just like to clarify if the World Bank already factored in the lower than expected GDP numbers in the first quarter when you decided or when you retained the growth forecasts for this year, and moving forward, what's also the view of the World Bank on the growth outlook for the Philippines in the near term, at least for this year? Thank you, sir.
The answer is yes, we did, but we see the rest of the quarters in the year showing a different pattern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we think especially the reduction in government spending in the first quarter was quite stark, but we know that Cabinet and the line agencies are working very hard to ramp up that spending. Also, government spending is just part of it. Yeah, we also have projected private sector spending and the global trends.
For my second question, in the report, the World Bank cited two risks for the developing economies. One is the normalization of monetary conditions in advanced economies, and also the lower oil prices. May we just ask, on the first aspect, how exposed, or what's the vulnerability of the Philippines in terms of impending normalization of monetary policies in advanced economies, given the country's strong fundamentals? Thank you.
I want Jay Peiris also to comment on this, but from our side, the exposure to sort of short, hot flows of financial resources in the Philippines is quite low. Yeah, so we don't think it has much of an impact. And then, of course, the Philippines always has this buffer of remittances coming in every year or every month from outside, which is about 10% of GDP. The lower oil prices are just good, yeah? So it just makes it just not only translates into lower energy prices, fuel costs, but also lower food prices. So the food production is actually quite energy intensive. So if oil prices go down, then food prices go down, and we'll see that working its way through the economy and benefiting the poor also. But Jay, you want to comment on the capital account?
Yeah, I mean, on the potential for normalization and asynchronous monetary policies, I think we covered that apart in Article 4 assessment that Philippines' strong fundamentals, as you mentioned, especially the large current account surplus, which might be close to 5% of GDP this year, partly due to the low oil prices, which is a big boost for the Philippines, and also the high international reserves provide a big cushion against global financial volatility. So we don't see that as it's a short-term risk, and there'll be some impact on the Philippines, but it should be very manageable. So in that sense, we see the medium-term focus at a lot of the issues Rogier mentioned about the focus on inclusive growth and sustaining the growth, the critical aspects.
Thank you.
Who wants to ask the next question? Yes. Please state your name and name of your organization.
Thank you. Again, I'm Shane Velasco from PIA, Philippine Information Agency. Sir, one of the 4 pillars in order to promote Cebu Action Plan is the accelerating infrastructure development, and we recognize that SPAR spending on infrastructure is very vital on achieving sustainable growth. In the World Bank side, what are your suggestions in order to fast track spending, in order to avoid underspending, and also to generate jobs, because we all know that that's our concern right now?
So I think what the government of the Philippines has done on infrastructure spending, and particularly the Department of Public Works and Highways, is exactly the way they go. So they first revamped the entire system. Yeah. So Secretary Singson basically, under zero-based budgeting, when he started, he basically found a system which wasn't well managed, which had a lot of room for corruption, with untransparent bidding, etc. He stopped all of that, and that caused a reduction in spending, but I think that it was well worth it, and he has rebuilt that system now. So the quality of the spending on infrastructure in the Philippines has really improved a lot. Now it's a matter of scaling that up, and that's what the government is starting to do now. But I think that sequence in which you really improve the system from the ground up first, and then start scaling up, we think that's the last sequence. If that causes some underspending for a temporary period, so be it, because it makes no sense to spend lots of money on bad projects. And I think so. What we see is at the moment is part of the underspending is caused by the massive increases in the budget, but which are now handled by a system which is more efficient than it was before. So we think going forward, that increase in the budget will be well handled in the years to come.
Maybe just if I can add something on that response, to say that we, clearly what Rogier said about the quality of spending is the key issue, and the efficiency of infrastructure spending could have a more bang for the buck today than it normally does. But another reason, the short-term impact was very well explained. Another thing which is probably important for the medium term is that the Philippines also didn't really have an organic budget law, so there were fundamental kind of not flaws or issues with the budgeting, execution, monitoring process. And some of these things will take time to adjust, which would require changes, including in the budget law. And I think there is a proposal by a number of senators and the House of Representatives to have a new public financial management law, which would kind of take you to the next step to address some of these issues, which are not necessarily easy to tackle only by changing institutional features. Thank you.
Remember, if you look at the size of the increases, if you look at spending on health, education, social protection, infrastructure, these have doubled, tripled. Now, any system will have difficulties dealing with that. And as Jay said, The old system has a lot of trouble dealing with that. So that system needs to be renewed, and that's what the government is doing.
Thank you, sir. I have one last question. You present recently the forecast of the World Bank on 2015 and 2016 growth. Among Asia-Pacific nations or Asia-Pacific economies, it is safe to say that the Philippines is among the most competitive. It's right. Among the most competitive in terms of economic growth forecast. It is safe to say.
I would say in terms of GDP growth, yes.
GDP, yes.
On competitiveness, that encompasses a whole range of other things. And there the Philippines still has come a long way, but it still has a long way to go. So if you look at doing business index, big improvements, but from a very low start, yeah? And so there's still a lot to be done. We talked this morning about customs operations, about both at the border and behind the border, red tape and licensing, and the Philippines still has a lot of work there to do, and that's especially important, by the way, for SMEs. Whereas large firms will drive the penetration of export markets, will bring the technology, will have the financial wherewithal. For the economy, the job creators are the SMEs that are linked to those large companies, and so if they have difficulties setting up, getting registered, getting power, getting all the licenses, then you really put a damper on job. But like I said, Philippines has made great strides on doing business, but it still needs
Yes.
a long way to go.
I'm sorry, just follow-up question. Any statement from the World Bank regarding the Congress is set to pass the proposed modernization of our customs? What can you say about that? Thank you, sir.
No, in general, we don't talk about legislation that is in front of Congress, but definitely the overall move towards modernization of customs, making it very easy, especially for SMEs, to move goods across borders. That's very, very key.
Okay, next question, Joanne.
Sir, good afternoon. Joanne from PNA. Sir, Mr. Vandenbrink, you earlier noted that growth is becoming more inclusive in the Philippines with the efforts put in place by the administration. Do you think that with the elections next year, this inclusive growth bid faces risks?
We also don't comment on elections. But I guess everybody, including yourself, you would like this change to continue, no? That's the point. So you've found yourself at a period in time in the history of your country where all these signs are looking very, very positive. So whatever happens in the elections, I think you all will hope that this trend continues.
Okay, Ben.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ben Devero of Philippine Daily Inquirer. Just to rephrase John's question, since we already have stable macroeconomic stability and you mentioned inclusive growth, so is this sustainable? That despite probably a change in government or even external risks from economies abroad would no longer be of much impact on the domestic economy? Can we sustain this for the longer term?
It should be. Yeah, so you're part of one of the most dynamic regions in the world. Yeah, we discussed that this morning. East Asia is a driver of global growth. You're part of that supply chain, all these supply chains in this region. You have one of the youngest labor forces in the region. You speak English. The labor is dedicated. It works hard. Yeah, you've had macro situation very, very stable. The political situation has been very, very stable. So all these factors should make for a situation in which this inclusive growth pattern is continued.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions from the floor?
That's it.
Okay, to our speakers, since we're also talking about the Cebu Action Plan for this senior finance officials meeting, perhaps you can give some comments on what are your thoughts on the Cebu Action Plan. They have 4 pillars. Do you think these four pillars are really the key issues that APEC, their overall growth of sustainability and inclusivity? Yeah,
Well, maybe
Mr.
I
Brekk.
could, yes, thank you. Well, clearly, from what I said, the challenge facing the world economy and the APEC region right now is to ensure that growth is sustainable and stable and to reduce vulnerabilities. And looking at the four pillars in the Cebu Action Plan, they are very clearly focused on this. So in a broad sense, we think that the Cebu Action Plan is the right policy plan at this particular time. Thank you.
Agreed completely. And one highlight, I think, the idea to open up an automated fast-track window for SMEs to trade across borders. That I think is an idea which would be very, very welcome.
Mr. Peiris, your thoughts on the Cebu Action Plan?
You know, I mean, especially the infrastructure aspect is a critical one. And you know, the world in the World Economic Outlook last year, we made a big push for infrastructure push globally. And you know, especially with the infrastructure gaps in Asia, including the Philippines, there's a big opportunity, and including both public investment, which also needs to be raised, but also PPPs and private investment. So a large focus of this APEC is also on kind of how we can take the next step on infrastructure spending, both public and private, which we think is very timely and also has a big potential bang for the buck for the global economy, especially by improving the efficiency of spending, which I think is also a focus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask one more if there's any last question. Okay, there's no more. So we'll ask our gentlemen to go back to their conference venue for the afternoon session. Thank you very much to our friends from the media. Yeah, I'll be back later this afternoon for another round of press conference. Thank you.